On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Tanaz Mody. She is the head of people, operations, and talent at Lerer Hippeau. We're going to be talking about founders. We're going to be talking about how they have to make a ton of decisions, especially within the context of hiring. And a lot of times, when you start examining the founder, they just got a lot of decisions, got a ton of weight on their shoulders. And obviously, they have to navigate in areas that they might not have. And we're going to kind of touch with Tanaz in terms of how she works with founders to help them understand how to kind of navigate some of those unknowns. And super excited. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Lerer Hippeau, tell everyone what you guys do over there.
Yeah, so we're early stage investors, specifically seed rounds is where we heavily invest. We've been in the New York ecosystem, one of the first early stage investors in New York about 14 years ago. And so the firm's been around for quite some time. We're generalist investors, so across anything from fintech to balloon technology is where I've seen us invest over the last 2 years or so that I've been with the firm.
Awesome. So, obviously goes without saying, founders have tons of decisions to make daily, by the minute. Like that's their whole life. They have to make a decision or a trade-off. Obviously, decisions aren't always easy. There's some tough decisions. You might struggle, but you still have to make one. You have to move forward. And when we talk about hiring, I guess this is an area that I find a little tricky when you're working with a founder, because sometimes they're very close to the hiring process, and it's super important. They want to get these hires right because they know the difference between the right hire at the right time versus a bad one's massive. I guess let's talk about that. Let's talk about when you're a founder and you talk to a lot of founders. So this is obviously in the context of you as a head of people, operations, talent, Lerer Hippeau. You speak to tons of founders and you can kind of articulate that yourself. But when you're talking to founders and they're going through this decision-making process and they are very concerned about wanting to make sure that next hire is someone that makes an impact, what do they face from just from a mental hiring perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the founders are always, or not always, but sometimes fearful of making the wrong hire. And I usually instill confidence of when you're going to make the right hire. Don't feel forced into the decision for any means of whether it be through a recruiter that you're using or just out of potential need there. But the way I kind of start the conversation always is remembering to think about your org as a whole and how this person fits into it to ensure that you're truly hiring for the person, for the role, for the competencies, for the places that you need. And then that's able to kind of articulate better exactly what it is that you're looking for from a background perspective, experience perspective, and then even just in terms of that fit to be able to work closely with the founder.
So I guess when a founder is looking to make a hire, obviously they're really close to the process. As the company grows, they get a little bit more space and distance. But in those early days, when they are, let's say, going out to make a critical hire, they're very close to that process. And sometimes because, quote unquote, it's their baby, it's their everything, it's their blood, sweat, and tears, they get very critical in terms of that skill set they're hiring for, that bar. And it's fair, but also, is there a way to get better perspective being that close? What do you see when you talk to founders?
Yeah, I look, when they start the company, they're the one doing everything. And then eventually you start delegating, ideally, and handing things off. And that handoff is important. And if I do see potentially founders where they're struggling with, whether it be having there's certain folks that I know out there that are I can do it all. I can potentially I could do this job the best out of everybody, understanding that your company is never going to move forward if you keep doing what you're doing today. If your role doesn't evolve over time, your company will not. And so you have to figure out and define for yourself what it is that you need to hire for and who it is that you're going to be able to trust to do the handoff to, because that will lead you to success, to be able to move on to something else and something to keep the company moving forward. It's interesting. I was having a conversation today with someone around change. Change is inevitable with early stage companies, and it just keeps happening. And if there's no change, your company is stagnant. And so if you're not continuing to hire and hiring across the board, there's like a point of stagnation, which maybe is not healthy. When there's change, that's really healthy. And those are good signs for early stage companies.
I actually think that's some great insight. And when you're looking at founders and you're looking at, these critical decisions, obviously, when it comes to the business side, when it comes to decisions on product features, market fit, you see them very dynamic. You see them very understanding that their vision might have to be crafted, molded. Not all the time, right? So these are generalizations we're talking about. So hopefully no one will be like, hey, I'm not like that. But generally, they're very able to pivot, move, to find a better fit, to find an adjustment, find a feature that clicks with the customer, talk to customers. They're very driven in that sense. And I guess when they start getting into the execution side of it, where all of a sudden now a particular decision has consequences, I have seen times where people just keep delaying that decision, right? And in the context of hiring, it's like, well, I like to see another candidate. I like to see another candidate. I'm not sure, maybe a couple more. And you're like, well, if the more rocks you turn over, we don't know if they're going to be better. They will be different, but they will not necessarily be better than the other candidates you've seen. And I guess in that context, when you see a founder struggling with that, I'm looking for the right person. Is that a case of they know the right person in their head and they haven't found it? Is it a case of not really having spent time thinking through, quote unquote, who right is to be able to know when they found him? Or I guess, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I see a mix of all sorts of stuff there, and I see that a lot. And it can be anything from like the pain point isn't strong enough, they actually don't need to make the hire, and which is why the delaying is happening. Two is they, like you said, just haven't properly defined. Three is they actually don't want to let go of it, and it is an area. And I see this a lot on the sales side of sales leadership roles. And there's a fine line to walk there of like, when does a founder hand off certain aspects of the sales function, or even just process. And so this topic specifically comes up more often on that front when it comes to hiring. But I think it could mean a couple different things. And I think I always, when I work with founders, I set milestones as they're like, I'm looking for a VP of engineering. I'm like, that's great. That's super exciting. This is going to be great. 30 days, let's touch base, see where we are. If you want to, and like mark the search out at 90 days, if we don't have candidates that are moving to the final stage or whatever it is, like whatever the reasonable time frame is, we need to take a pause and actually relook at everything from scope of role to the way we're doing it, our sourcing, our interview process, because there's potential that we're going down a path that like you could search for someone that you're not ready for in any of those capacities for a very, very long time. And that's wasted time. And every minute costs you something.
I heard growing up, if you don't make a decision, one's made for you. And I didn't quite ever understand what that meant. But I grew up and I realized that if that decision is not made, the dynamics shift. And sometimes then you're backed into decisions that you didn't want to make or weren't prepared to evaluate against. And I think it's interesting because the notion of a founder being very flexible, malleable, dynamic, those are all characteristic traits. But when it comes to some of these execution pieces of hiring, we do see some pause because of the impact, right? And I can understand from their perspective, hey, this impact's going to be massive. If I get this wrong, it's money, it's time. These are all lost opportunity causes. When you're working with founders and you're kind of helping them understand how to help, you mentioned, the clarity and the focus in terms of, let's say, for a particular hire, do you know who you're looking for? When you're trying to help a founder in that coaching process, how do you know if they're actually listening? How do you know if they're actually taking on the advice versus nodding their head and then going back and doing, what they want? Because a lot of times people don't really take that much advice. We're sometimes not coachable. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, that's just part of human nature. And then you do have the people that are really coachable, but the people that are not coachable, how do you pay attention to that so you can find a different way to help them? Because I think that's really the key. Is it's not that we're not coachable, It's finding the right voice that resonates, and then all of a sudden something clicks and you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is through discussion, and maybe they're not actually in need of the particular role or the particular function that they're thinking about building out. I give founders space as they need it. It's interesting. Sometimes founders will come to me and say, I need to hire a head of sales. I love like the large department kind of heads. I'm ready to hand it off. And then it goes silent. And I say, great, Liz, what would you think this profile looks like? We dive into it a little bit. We start talking about it. And then there's silence for like a month about it. Or I'll follow up and they'll say, you know what? I haven't really been able to prioritize that yet. And part of that is that they're just not ready to dive into it. And so there's an element to coachability, and there's an element to like folks being ready to actually make the move and commit to the search and to the role and to onboarding. And that requires time. And as you shared before, like because startups move so quickly and founders need to pivot, they may go today from needing a sales hire to all of a sudden realizing that they should not spend any of their time doing that. And they need to focus on product because there was a hiccup in some area. And so they do shift. And so me pushing my, like a potential, like my agenda of them hiring a salesperson is just not needed at this time. So again, like for me, it's expectation setting, and it's, okay, cool. Should we touch base about this again in 3 months? Should we touch base? And then they'll say, no, I actually need to raise another round before I can think about a sales hire. I'm like, I got it. No problem.
That's interesting. I mean, you're in a unique, obviously, people within the VC talent space are in a unique spot because they have patterns of recognition. They see patterns across different startups, different skills matrices for the founders. And it's very interesting because it's a perspective not everyone gets to have, right? I think it's a very unique consultative viewpoint. When you do get founders that reach out and obviously, they are looking at how to improve, and they're looking for ways that they can actually achieve more. Obviously you mentioned a couple things. You haven't talked about potential coaching. I have heard that founders sometimes could benefit from getting outside coaching. How instrumental is that, or is that something you prescribe for founders that might be looking to level up?
I don't necessarily prescribe. I may suggest, like, if our conversations are like need to go more in depth and dive deeper into kind of like their journey, we could have a whole nother conversation around the journey from being a founder to a CEO. And I think a lot of these hires are stepping stones into folks like becoming a CEO. And in terms of like that tunnel vision that you mentioned of like this, I know this product best, I'm in it. Founders need to go, if this is the role they want to be, is like that CTO, that CEO, and they need to be able to look at the company from that 30,000 foot view than being in the weeds all the time. And I think that's an evolution that happens over time with the company maturing, with hiring certain people, with trusting, with handing off proper delegation. All of that happens over time. And so with that, depending on how the conversation evolves, going from a founder to a CEO can be quite the interesting journey. And I don't care how many times you've done it. It's different every single time. And I think anyone who has co-founded a company or founded a company before would agree. Every journey is different. You're building a different product. It's with a different team. And there's challenges that are just helpful to have someone to walk alongside with you as you go through that journey.
Is it a difficult road? And maybe it's not. So I'm going to let you answer it. I look at a founder and I go, it's a tough spot to be in. Tons of pressure, lots of expectation. You're promising that you can deliver something. It might not even be agreed upon or decided, but there's something you're promising. You're bringing to market. You're delivering. You're building, creating. Sometimes it feels like it's very hard for a founder to turn around and say, you know what, I don't know this, right? Because there might be perception, right? People might all of a sudden go, it might be something that they should know, and all of a sudden raise his eyebrows, and then it might affect a future round of investing. They have to be very careful in terms of how they, put out their body of knowledge, their understanding, their background. As a talent partner, when you are trying to help a founder, they've come to you, like, obviously this is a delicate balance. Talk to us a little bit about that relationship, because obviously you guys are there to support the founders. You want them to succeed. They have to feel like there's a safe space to come out and ask for what they need. How does that safe space get cultivated so they can feel comfortable to share?
When I first meet founders, I take a little bit of time to understand their background. And it's everything from, I mean, all of them are, the founders we invest in are very, very impressive in many different ways, grown companies, been part of executive teams that have grown and gone on to do amazing things. And I just look to understand where their strengths are and where they have experience on and what will come to them more naturally and more organically, and honestly, just feel more comfortable. And then where potentially areas are that are not comfortable, because none of us are perfect. And none of us know everything. And anyone who does think that they do might not be the best founder or CEO, but understanding where you peak and like what you're really strong at is important. And then balancing out your team accordingly. And so taking time to understand that dynamic and what it is that they do very well from an operating standpoint, and then understanding them as a leader, because they do need to be leaders and founders do need to step out of their comfort zone, how I can help them on that, and then balance out their team accordingly with areas that they don't have any knowledge. I'm going to use the experience again of a sales leader that goes on to go become a founder, which we've invested in quite a few, right? And those folks are phenomenal on the sales and marketing side and go to market. On the engineering and product side, I need to be sure that they are finding the right partner that they can trust and that they can have those questions and those conversations. I just don't get it. Product manager, product CPO, like, why does it take the engineering team 4 weeks to get this done? Can you explain this to me? I think a lot of it goes around trust and having that healthy dynamic between members of the team. And my job in that is just understanding their roles and how they're evolving to be able to complement them.
Absolutely. I think, I find the VC talent world fascinating because I feel like there's such a great resource for founders, to support them. And obviously I've come to really appreciate how you guys get to see lots of different permutations and how best practices apply differently to different companies. Because I think sometimes we think there's best practices, and then from my consulting background, I'm like, that's great, but it's best practice applied to this company and this situation is the best practice for them. There's no industry, but there might be some baselines that are industry-wide best practices, but a lot of times everything needs to be customized down. And I think everything I've kind of heard, you mentioned is very much in line with that. And I think that's fantastic.
I remember I've been in this early stage. I was an operator previous to this. I worked in early stage companies for, I don't know how many years, over 12 years. And I remember early on, it was a bit of the playbooks that were shared. And my founder would be like, my CEO would be like, look, Tanaz, I got this recruiting playbook from our investor. And I'd be like, neat. And I'd open it and be like, this is so generic. It's not helpful. Also, this is not relevant to our business, considering we're building something new that's never been built before, which means our org structure needs to be thoughtful, which means who we hire and how their skill set potentially needs to be, utilized in a different way than it has been before. Like, all needs to be rethought. And so for me, if you want to be innovative, like a playbook, fine, in terms of like the different options around like how you could structure a sales team, but that is just a data point. It is not your end. This is how you should do it, because you're building something that's never been built before. Maybe your sales team needs to look totally different. Maybe the backgrounds of your sales people that you're going to be hiring for actually don't have sales backgrounds, because according to the industry, people actually like experts and less of the sales. So like those are conversations that I have with our founders. Here are some templates of like what you can look at and think about, but it's just a starting point. This is not me being prescriptive of like, go with model 3.
I like that. It's very well put. And you said something I've picked up on now within the VC talent space of the notion of operators. I come from the technical side of the world. I've learned the talent side. So I never worked internal. Everything I know about talent's working with talent, trying to learn every single thing I can. One thing I've noticed I find really interesting is that, VC talent, you talk about operators. And I know there's a people ops role within, within companies. I really like that term operators, because I think a lot of times when people think about talent acquisition, or, they think about the people roles or the HR roles, they sound very parts of the process that have been cut up and defined as I'm in this part of the process. Whereas I really like this term. No, I'm not changing. No one's changing job titles because I like it. But I really think there's something to this. I'm going to keep mentioning it to every talent person I can, because I think there's something that, when you talk to people, and if you look back at your role previously, you had great perspectives at different companies, I'm sure, with different you worked at, and we can just, somebody can go on your LinkedIn, Aptiv, Warner Brothers, Bloomberg, Google. You've got a fantastic background. So obviously you've seen different things. But in terms of how you approach working with founders now, and again, sorry, technical people, you might not like this, but for the talent people listening, this is for you. If you were to look back at your background and be like, listen, I've always had this ability to advise, was it always used as you are now when you were going back through your career and looking at different roles you've held in different positions within the talent space? Because it sounds like you have it, but no one tapped into it, or maybe I'm wrong.
The function has evolved. I think people operations and talent has evolved. The people operations title used to be called human resources, HR, right? And it evolved to people operations. And I'd say, like, when I stepped into the function back in 2012, 2013, whenever it was like this newer title. And even I wasn't very, very familiar with it and what it meant. And it meant that you were operating with the rest of the company and understanding things more holistically than just putting together a handbook. And that's the same for the talent function, just around understanding more about the role and how it functions to help define the level and the background of the person and all that stuff. So truly being a partner as an operator has evolved, I think, over the last, 14, 12 years, 10 years or so, a lot. And I think businesses are seeing the value of having the people talent function as more of a partner than just an executioner.
I like it. Well said. Thank you for being on. Thank you for sharing all the insights. I think lots of interesting points you've made. I think, hopefully people will take value. I'm sure we didn't also exhaust all these topic areas. We probably scratched the surface. So people could always have questions, and they might want to reach out to you. What is a good way of connecting with you, Tanaz?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Tanaz Mody, or you can direct message me on LinkedIn. I do respond.
Okay, that's good. We'll make sure we include that in the show notes. But again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing.
Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think the topic and theme of this episode about the challenges founders have in executing. There's a lot of decisions, lots of pressures. I think we talked about within the context of hiring, in the context of how they might view where they're at within their stage of business. Even I'll touch on a little bit of what the difference is between getting to that founder and the next level up as a true CEO, CTO. So share this with somebody else who might benefit from it. I appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.